Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the podcast for entrepreneurs and business leaders to help unlock more productivity and creativity so you get a better business. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked how to help an introvert improve their presentation skills. So I've asked Dr Simon Raybould, who is a great presentation skills trainer, to join us. But just before that, time to burst one quick introvert myth. There's a big difference between shy and introverted. They're not the same, although the two can overlap. You could have a shy introvert. Shy is about being timid in company, or a fear of interaction, as some people would put it, or perhaps even more strongly. Whereas introversion is about how introverts gain or lose energy amongst people or on their own, and the way they process their thoughts. This week, for example, I was chatting to a shy, extroverted friend of mine. Yeah, they do exist. He gains energy in a group of people, but doesn't want to talk to them. A few months ago, we were out networking at dinner time. I'm losing energy like a worn-out mobile phone battery, but chatting. He was gaining energy like a solar panel in the desert, and you could see him getting more excited, but he didn't want to talk. What introvert myth would you like exposed, or introvert tip discussed? I'd love to hear from you. I'd also like to receive your feedback on iTunes or podchaser.com. And if you'd like me to speak at your conference or help your team, I'd love to speak to you. Contact details are on the cover notes for this episode. Welcome, Simon.
Hi, good to be here.
This presentation skills thing, obviously you've been dealing with it for a long time. Really would love to know what it is about presenting that introverts don't like. And just before we get into that, I'd like to talk about you. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? And what impact does that have on you?
I am so introverted, I resent the question.
Excellent. That's good.
Hugely introverted. In any psychometric profile that I take, it always comes out maximizing my introversion. In terms of impact, that's huge. Actually, the first time I took a Myers-Briggs psychometric tool and came out as an introvert, I found it incredibly liberating, because I found that, okay, there's a label for me. I'm not a freak. In terms of what I do now, it's less of a problem than it used to be. I used to be a research scientist for 2.5 decades at universities doing heavy duty stats analysis and stuff like that. And I didn't know I was an introvert. I didn't know how extreme I was, because everybody else around me was exactly the same. You know, you would sort of nod on the corridor, and that would be your social interaction for the day as you went to make yourself a cup of tea. And it wasn't until I shifted from being a research scientist to being a presentation skills trainer that I started to realize exactly how extreme my introversion was.
That point you made about liberating is actually really common. Lots of introverts, when they realize that it's a thing and they're not the only one, report to me that they just feel so much better.
Yes, it is. And it's also quite sad that half the population feels that they're not normal. Statistically, obviously, if half the population is like it, they are normal.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, it doesn't always feel that way in the way society works at the moment.
No, quite. So if introverts allegedly don't like presenting, it's something I don't actually believe, how did you get into presentation skills, and why is it that introverts don't like it?
Introversion has nothing to do with whether you like presenting or not. Most people don't like presenting. We confuse introversion with shyness, and we confuse shyness with stage fright. Those are three very, very different things, and introversion is not related statistically to those particularly strongly, at least. So I'm an introvert, but I'm not shy. There is a general myth that introverts are shy. We're not. That's a very, very different kettle of fish. So I'm more than happy to walk on stage and say what I have to say. But then when I walk off stage, I don't want you to talk to me, because I've said what I'm going to say, I've done my bit, and now I'm back in my own head. But my experience of I've been doing it for 15 years now, of working with people who need to become speakers, who need to be able to present, is that introverts very, very often make the best presenters, because I'm going to put inverted commas around this phrase, so bear with me, they care less about the audience. I don't mean it in the sense that it sounds, but to an introvert, the message is the thing. And the audience are, my tongue in my cheek here, the audience are an inconvenient necessity, if you see what I mean. Whereas to an extrovert, they very often find themselves responding to the audience, reacting to the audience, working for the audience. And if the audience like it, they ham it up more. If the audience don't like it, they start to panic and feel that it's going wrong. Whereas an introvert doesn't have that vulnerability. For an introvert, they do what they do, and 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 they don't need so much the affirmation of the audience around them. So I do kind of like working with, I really like working with introverts. It's also true of dancers and a great number of actors. They kind of, they dance for the sake of the dance, and the audience are a necessary evil. They're how they get paid for it, but they are not there to perform for the audience. They're there to dance the dance. The same is true of the vast majority of introverts that I have worked with. It is much easier, ironically, to push an introvert up than it is to get an extrovert to calm down.
Yep, I can certainly see why that would be. So, no, that's really interesting. Certainly chimes with everything I see. So thank you for that, Simon. If I was an introvert and I'd approached you and said, Simon, I've got to go and speak on stage, or perhaps stand up in front of my team at work or something, what tips would you give me?
Oh, there's two big ones, I think, for introverts, and I use them both myself. The first is that you never want to go on stage. I've never been on stage. Honestly, Dr. Simon Raybould has never, ever, ever been on stage. There is an alter ego who looks suspiciously like me, and he's gone on stage. But the actual me has never gone on stage. So there's a process I use of, we call it phone boothing. You remember the old Superman stuff where Clark Kent ran into the phone booth, got changed, and then Superman flew out again? Phone boothing is the point when, before you make the presentation, the introvert you, just sits down, has a quiet word with yourself, and the Superman performing extrovert-ish presenter version of you steps out onto the stage. And there are rituals you can use for that. There are psychological tricks you can use for that. But basically, it boils down to create yourself an alter ego. And you ask yourself things like, I don't want to do this, but if I did want to do this, what would that look like? And then you do that. It's really simple, really simple. I don't know where to stand on stage, but if I did know where to stand on stage, where would I stand? Or I don't know where to stand on stage, but so-and-so looks good on stage. Where do they stand? And you channel other people. But ultimately, it's about channeling the model of yourself.
Point number one then is you don't go on stage, your alter ego goes on stage.
Because that protects your private. I was going to say it protects your private bits. That sounds wrong, but
but I know what you
private
mean.
Bits. Say.
Brilliant.
And the other one is the second one is to think of the presentation itself not as the thing. It is the climax of the thing. What a lot of people do is they assume that the presentation starts at 1:00, and at 10:50, therefore, they go into presenter mode. And at 1:30, when they finish, they come out of presenter mode. And introverts in particular don't want to be doing that. Introverts need to be thinking of half an hour to an hour of either side, so that the energy gradually ramps up. There's the climax of the performance, and then it gradually ramps down, so that when you get off stage, you are still in performance mode. Instead of putting a 1:00 presentation in your diary, you put that in your diary for 2 hours. Half an hour before and half an hour after, or whatever, so that psychologically you're committed to being the performer well before the presentation starts. So, for example, I've made mistakes with this in the past. I've come off stage, I've done a 45-minute stonking gig, I've come off stage, and I've changed back into personal Simon as I've come off stage, and I've not been able or not been happy to talk to the audience, answer questions, and all of that kind of jazz, because I wanted to be in my personal space. Now, I was lucky because I had a member of my team there who was with me, who was able to answer questions and field those questions on my behalf. So I didn't alienate and didn't annoy the audience, because they could see that she was speaking there on my behalf with my authority. But most people aren't that lucky. They don't have team members who can cover for them. But if I'd come off stage and thought, my performance is still continuing for the next half an hour. It is just that it is a performance that's answering individual questions rather than a performance at the front of the room. I would have stayed in alter ego mode. And similarly, at the beginning of the presentation, you don't go into the room and then the presentation. What you do is, if the meeting is at 1 o'clock, you go into your alter ego at about 1:45, 12:30, and it is your alter ego that walks into the room even before you go on stage. Sorry, I cut across you there.
No, I was just going to say, I was just working that out in my head, a thing that introverts tend to do and process everything internally before talking. So this is very much the second one, is about mental preparation. The beforehand bit means that as soon as you see all the people in the room, your alter ego is seeing them rather than you. Yep. And the after bit is allowing you to deal with the questions afterwards and all the acclaim that you'll get because you did such a good job as your alter ego again.
The acclaim or the questions or the mockery. But the important thing is that it is the performer you that is coping with it, not the real you that is coping. I mean, there are lots and lots of other tricks that introverts can use.
Oh, I'm sure.
But those are the two most popular ones.
That's brilliant, Simon. Thank you. And I'm sure that many of the listeners will be listening and going, we'd like some more of those tips, Simon.
The easiest place to go is to go to presentationgenius.info. I hate that title. It's not one I chose. My publishers for my last book said, right, we're going to call it Presentation Genius because a book that's called Presentation Genius will sell, whereas a book that's called How to Make Your Presentation Slightly Less Rubbish is not going to be a bestseller. So they called it Presentation Genius and the brand has just kind of stuck. So if you go to presentationgenius.info/hi.
Look forward to catching up soon.
Yeah, and I just need to go and lie down in a darkened room to recover now.
Absolutely, so will I.
Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.